Yes, I've been making pots since I was 13. Started at summer camp where you had to pick something to do, and what I picked was pottery. And at first I was like, "Oh, this is really hard. I don't understand this," but I had to keep going back because you were required to keep going back, and I kept going back. And by the end of the summer, I was like, "Oh, I want to keep doing this," and I've just always done it since then. Where I went to college, we had a little pottery studio, and I kind of ran it and just kept learning how to make stuff. And then just all through my adult life, I've had a wheel for a long time, fired at different places, took classes where I could, and yeah, I mean, really, I'm doing it for me because I love the process.
Sure.
And when you're a potter and you make a lot of stuff, you can't have it all in your house, so it has to go somewhere.
I already have 2 meat coffee cups.
Yeah, so I, for a long time, and shout out, by the way, to my daughter Miranda, who made this. She does all kind of designing stuff, and I just thought it was really cool. So, but my stuff for a long time kind of looked like that. Like I didn't really understand the idea of surface decoration. I like throwing the best. I'm a mud person rather than a fire person. I do not like glazing. I don't think it's that much fun. So, but I would do it because glazing is what made your pots come out pretty. And I took a class at Laguna Gloria maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years ago with Melissa Mancini, who's a fantastic potter, and it was an entire class on surface decoration. And I was like, oh, there's so many techniques. So she brought us through paper resist and tape resist and sgraffito and underglazes, and she showed us Mishima, which is the Japanese version of, or at least that's the Japanese word for basically inlay. And I was just so taken with all the different ways that you can decorate a pot and all the different colors you could use. And that was really exciting. And as I was going through the class, one night Melissa and I were sitting looking at one of the computers in there, and she showed me pots by this guy, which is Michael Klein, who probably some of you know of. He's out in North Carolina, and he does beautiful brushwork, but also does these really intricate inlay pots. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. So I started looking at slip inlay, which is what he does for this technique. And there's not a whole lot out there about it. There's not a book of the history of slip inlay or slip inlay techniques. So basically it was just sort of trolling the internet, looking at, how do people do this process. The technique that Melissa taught us in class was more of a take a needle tool and inscribe some lines and then fill it in with an underglaze and then sponge it off. And I was like, well, yeah, that's nice, but it still leaves the texture of the line in there. I want something that's flush with the surface. I want nobody to be able to tell how this design got into this pot until they realize, oh, it's just inlaid in there. Just like, a guitar neck or other stuff that's inlaid. So it was piecing together, like this is one of Michael Klein's pots where you can sort of see, I started figuring out, okay, what's the process here? Well, obviously he's got this loopy scraping tool and he's scraped all this stuff off. So you put the slip in these holes that you make in the pot, and then once you've got it in there and it's dry enough, then you scrape it off. And so I just started kind of looking around on the internet at what are different people doing with slip inlay, and just found some random images that I kind of kept in a collection of pictures that I liked, and it's like, wow, you can do all these colors, and it's sort of, you start to realize it's sort of this unlimited range of things that you can work with. The oldest, I think, kind of history of inlay stuff that I could find was, this is a Korean inlay pot, and there's 2 Korean words, buncheong and sangam, that you'll see in a lot of references, and this is one of those pots, I think, from the 1600s maybe. But they're all just done with, incising something, filling it in, with slip and then scraping the slip off. But you can see other things like there's different colors of inlay on this pot. And so I just started to really get fascinated with all of how just like trolling around on the internet, Googling slip inlay, you maybe come up with 10 or 12 potters who are sort of actively, or at least what I could find, sort of actively doing that. And I came upon this one, which I think, Colin, goes to your question of organic versus, and I saw this potter's work and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do that. And so I was looking at it and I was like, okay, this is inlay, so the white parts are inlaid into the black clay body, but how the hell do you do that, and how do you get your shapes like that? So I looked at a whole bunch of her pottery, and you can, if you've seen what mine looks like, it's fairly similar. Her name is Kitamura Junko, Junko, and she's Japanese. She has had a few gallery shows in New York. I've never seen one of her pots in person, but if I did, I would, follow like I was meeting the Beatles or whatever. Because I just think that what she does with negative space and positive space and just her designs are so incredible. But more, I just wanted to understand how to do it. So I tried, and I took a picture of my first attempt, which was
Nailed it.
Exactly. So in trying to figure out like how does she do that? I was like, okay, well, you have to have a black background. So how do I make a black background? Well, I paint black underglaze on a pot. So on this one, I made a pot and I painted black underglaze on it. And then I made the little divots in the pot. I painted black underglaze on the greenware when it was still sort of soft. Made the little divots, and then I fired it. And then I took some white underglaze and I filled that in after it was bisqued, and I fired it. And of course, it does not look like her pottery even remotely. But also, you can see has like all these textural problems with little holes in the white parts and everything, and I was like, okay, I need to kind of go back to first principles and figure out, okay, what is actually inlay? So I made this, and I think this is some armadillo clay, Cinco Rojo. All my firing is cone 5, so there's no high fire involved, although I've understood that maybe I have the dogs. Wood-fired kilns really like the cone 5 porcelain from Armadillo, so we might be trying that in the future. But so I did this, and this was just where I took basically a loop tool and I made little incisions in the pot, and then I filled them in with just white, like reclaimed slip, and it kind of worked. And then I put a Armadillo matte white glaze on top so that it all looks kind of cloudy and ugly. But then I had the process, and I kind of understood. And so then going back to her stuff, I was like, okay, how does she make all these little triangles in her pot? So I went to Home Depot and I was like, where am I going to find a triangular tool? And so I looked all around at like all the little like hex wrench kinds of things and everything, and there was nothing, of course, that would work. And then I hit on, wait a minute, why don't I just carve it out of wood? And then we had these bamboo chopsticks, like Chinese takeout chopsticks. You have to use the ones that are stuck together with the little rectangular bottom. But they make for really great tools that you can carve really easily. Like these, I think I carved with a pumpkin carving knife, and you just whittle down the ends of them, and I'll show on the camera in a minute, but whittle down the ends of them until they're whatever shape you want them to be. So I did that, and then I still didn't have the black background that I wanted, like her pots. And so I actually asked Melissa, how would you do that? And she said, well, just put some mason stain and some clay and do it that way. And I was like, oh, you can stain clay? That's cool. So I did that, and then I made that, which is an obvious ripoff, but I think I had the technique kind of down. I mean, you have to rip off somebody to figure out what you want to do, right? So, and the idea is you rip them off enough, and then you figure out your own ideas enough to where you're sort of still ripping them off, but you're also applying your own sense of what you want your stuff to look like, that it's not a total copy. So, you know, feel free to come look at the stuff as you want to as we're going along here. But I figured out, you know, kind of the basic idea of you stain some clay black with the mason stain, and the way that I do that is I just grab some white reclaimed scraps, put the mason stain into those. Always wear a respirator anytime you're dealing with dry mason stain. And then I'll take just some cone 5 porcelain clay once, and I'll, with the reclaimed scraps, I'll put the mason stain powder into it, lay it out on the plaster vat until it's dry enough to wedge into some regular clay, and you have a really concentrated mason stained reclaim pile that you then wedge into the clay enough to get the mason stain all distributed through it, and then you have your regular mason stained clay. You guys probably all know how to do this. But that's how I learned how to stain clay, and as I was thinking about, okay, am I going to use white underglaze to fill in these holes? Melissa said underglaze is not really designed for filling in, like the holes that I make in the pots you'll see in a minute, they're pretty deep. I mean, they're maybe a quarter of an inch, they can be up to a quarter of an inch deep, so well, no, not a quarter, an eighth of an inch. But they need to be filled in with something that's not underglaze, because underglaze doesn't hold up like clay. It craters, and it's not designed to be like clay. It's designed to be painted on a surface and be decoration. So she said, just make some slip out of your reclaim, and I was like, oh, you could do that. So I got the drill bit that turns around, and I made porcelain slip out of some porcelain reclaim. And that's what I ended up using for this. So this pot and all the other ones that I've made are basically just cone 5 porcelain with mason stain put into them. I'm not super careful about measuring. To do a pound of black mason stain wants to be in about 20 pounds of porcelain. So I just cut off what I estimate is 5 pounds out of the bag, put it somewhere else, and use the rest of approximately 20 pounds. And I found you don't have to be super precise with your colors if you don't care about, you know, having a consistent color group every time, which I don't really. As long as it's close enough to black. If it's deep black or a little bit grayish black, I'm not too concerned about that. But that's really how I do it. So now in my studio I have, you know, black clay that I use regularly. Now I reclaim it when I've trimmed a black pot, and I have a big bucket of black reclaim that sits in my studio, and I just use that. So that's kind of the first step toward figuring out what, you know, how I was gonna do this whole inlay process. And so the basic steps of the process are to, you know, obviously make your pot, trim it. When you're doing inlay like this, you have to keep the clay kind of as wet as possible, because not only does it want to be wet for when you're punching the designs into it, but it also wants to be as wet as possible when you're filling in the designs with slip, because my sense is that as you put the slip into the leather hard clay, the shrinkage rates are going to, you know, the leather hard clay is going to dry at a different rate from what the slip is going to dry at. So if your clay is as close to being as wet as the slip as possible, I think that helps them sort of marry better. And so the step where you fill in the designs with slip until the slip is flush with the surface of the pot, that really wants to be, sometimes it takes 7 or 8 coats of slip over the pot until it gets flush. Sometimes I'll start to scrape off the slip before it's entirely flush, and that seems to be okay. But if you don't put enough coats of slip on, you're going to end up with your impressions kind of running out and getting, you're back to the surface under the impressions, and then you don't have a design anymore. Yeah.
Do you want to defloculating the slip, or you just?
That's a really good question.
What did he say?
He asked if I deflocculate the slip. For anybody who doesn't know what a deflocculant is, my answer is not yet. I have a little pint-sized jar of Darvon 7 sitting in my place, but one of the biggest problems, and why he's mostly asking about this probably, is that anytime you make an impression in clay and you fill it in with slip, you're likely to have air pockets inside of that. So one way to fix that is, and what the air pockets do is they make sort of like what I showed you earlier with this guy, all these little holes in there. A lot of those are caused by air pockets. And so when you're filling in the impressions that you've made with slip, you want it to be something that flows in as much into the impressions as possible. So what I do usually is I have 2 thicknesses of slip that I use. The first thickness is really, really runny, almost like half and half. And so that, I hope, gets enough into each impression that it fills in all the little corners in there. Because what happens is if you end up with air pockets, either it'll cause the impression to crater and you'll have a little hole in it, or if the air pocket is big enough, it'll actually pop out your impression or the slip that filled in the impression, and then you have a pot with a little thing that's needs to be just sanded off the surface, and then you don't have your slip inside the impression anymore. So the first couple of coats of slip that I put is that half and half consistency, and then once I'm pretty sure, and I'll show you in a minute when I put slip on into some impressions, you really have to kind of bang it in there, and sometimes I bang it in there with a brush. Then I'll just use my fingers and go over it, tapping it in so that I try to make sure that the slip all gets in there. But what a deflocculant is, and you may be able to explain this better than I can, but it takes a viscous substance and somehow makes it more runny without adding water to it. So it's something that will, if you add a deflocculant to your slip, it makes it so that it sort of travels around more easily and more like water without being water than it would be if you didn't have it in there. Michael Klein uses a deflocculant in his inlay process, and I had been wanting to try that because pretty much every slip inlay pot that I've made, after I've inlaid it and then scraped off the excess, there's gonna be some impressions where the slip, for whatever reason, didn't take, and so I end up having to go and correct those after I've done all the scraping, and I'll show you how that goes in a minute. So after I've done my however many coats of slip, I wait until it's pretty much leather hard consistency. Yeah, that one's pretty much ready, so we'll scrape that in a minute. And you want to keep everything wrapped in plastic as you're going, and sometimes, especially if I'm really busy with work, sometimes I don't get into the studio for a couple days, which I think is great for these pots, because I think the longer the slip gets to rest into the impressions and combine the clay molecules of the slip with the clay molecules of the base layer clay, I think that helps everything not come apart so much. So the more you keep it covered and the more time you give it, I think the more happily married those things are to each other. And then once you've gotten to the point where you've put all your coats of slip on, you've kept it under plastic for a couple of days to make sure that all the moisture is equalizing between the slip and the pot. Then you scrape off the slip. there's so many different kinds of scraping tools that you can use, but my favorites that I found are these wooden handled Euclid ones that they sell at Armadillo. They're just really sharp, and they also are great to have this curve that works really well if you're working on a platter or something. So, but Armadillo sells really expensive sets of scraping tools, but these I've found to just be really good. Although they don't last that long, they do get dull pretty quickly as you're scraping. And then once you've scraped the slip off, my recommendation is don't touch the pot anymore if you can help it. Don't sand it, don't sponge it, don't scrape after it's bone dry, because anything like that you do, if you scrape it more, for some reason the clay color is going to come out differently if you scrape it bone dry from if you scrape it when it's leather hard. So ideally scrape it when it's leather hard. Sometimes I have to scrape a pot that's bone dry because I let it get too dry out. But you want to scrape it all at the same degree of hardness. And then anytime you put a sponge on it that involves putting water on it, you're in danger of popping out some of your slip that's in the inclusion. So don't do that. And don't sand it, because if you sand it, you'll also pop out the inlay. I sort of, in a way, I sort of wish it wasn't so delicate, because I don't think pottery should be delicate like that. But at the same time, once it's gone through bisque firing and glaze firing, it's going to be okay. Although I've had experiences sanding glaze fired. I don't usually glaze my inlaid stuff, but trying to sand it will create, similarly to when it's greenware, it'll create different colors and textures of clay where I want it to be uniform. So the best you can do is just, once you've scraped off the slip and you've cleaned up everything, when it's leather hard, don't do anything else to it if you can help it. That's a lesson that's better said than done on my end. And I do also want to say, before I start showing you kind of how I do this, this is something that I'm still kind of learning how to do. So if anybody has, like the Darvon idea, if anybody has ideas for process improvements, I'm so open to hearing them, because this is still a process that I'm kind of developing. So I brought a couple things to sort of show you how I do these. This is the part that, unlike listening to me talk, which is fascinating, this is the part that's really going to be like, as fun as watching paint dry. But we'll take a minute to switch the cameras. Yeah.
Shut our mouth full of cookies.
Great.
We can move it around too.
Yeah. Okay, about right here. So I'll show you kind of close up what these tools look like. This one is a larger triangle. This one is a smaller triangle. Oops, sorry. They don't really show up that great. This one I use for anything that needs flower petals. It's just kind of an oval with pointy ends. And what I do for lots of pots, like you may have, if you've looked at my stuff at all, there's lots of circle designs. This one's got circles all the way through it. And what I'll do, I forgot to bring my compass, but I just take a compass and I'll inscribe, I'll start here, inscribe some circles, and then I just take one of my triangle tools, start with the big triangle, And let's see. Is that one through? Yeah. So you just take your tool and you make little impressions, and if you kind of wiggle it back and forth, that kind of makes sure that all of the edges of the triangle are filled in. And since I didn't bring my compass, this one we can kind of more improvise on. If I go off the screen because I'm not paying attention, just holler at me and I'll go back on. But you just keep going, and sometimes I don't use a compass, and so I just start with wherever my hand takes me. I'm terrible at representational art, like I can't draw people to save my life, but I have, I do like to put some representational-ish designs. This one looks like it could end up being something like mountains, and you just keep on this. You can, I like it because it's a way where I can be a little bit social with my making stuff. I can sit in the living room and hold one of these and talk to people, and I do get told sometimes, are you paying attention to me? And I'll realize that I've just been, sitting there looking at my putt. I often have to take my glasses off or, put them on top of my head if I'm doing something that involves, really close work. But eventually, you sort of get the sense of how far apart your triangles need to be in order for the next, a lot of these have sort of interlocking sets of triangles. And so, you start with something that's kind of like that, and then you can go to the next stage where you put in another set.
How thick is that piece?
That's a really good question. I throw kind of extra thick, and I try not to trim too much. Obviously, I trim the bottoms a lot because I can't throw something in that shape. But this is heavier than what I would want it to be if I was just making something and glazing it, because it does. Anytime I trim something and it's a little too thin, when I'm making the punches, sometimes it'll just go straight through the pot. That's okay because you can fill it in with more black clay and just be more careful next time. But the worst is when it's too thin, the whole pot will sort of start to cave in around the punches, and so they definitely want to be thick. And I think I have this prejudice that pottery should be thin and really easy to lift and delicate and everything, and it's been sort of liberating to make pots that are just kind of chunky, and I don't have to worry about pulling walls super thin or anything like that.
Would you say it's like 1/4 of an inch or more?
That's a good question. We can take a wire and find out. And anybody who wants to just, I'll leave this out. I don't know how to measure thickness of a pot that I threw. But it certainly could be that. You really want it to be where the walls will hold their own shape as you're making these impressions. And that's why, even though I said, you want to try to do these when the clay is as wet as possible, you can't do it when it's too wet, because if you start making impressions in clay when it's too wet, the whole thing will kind of cave. Plates are really fun to do this with. Partly just because they're sort of a great canvas for anything, but also it's really great when I do a plate. As you can see, I keep it on the bat for as long as possible, and that's great for when I'm punching them. I just put it on the wheel and I spin the wheel with my hand, which maybe you're not supposed to do that, I don't know, to get all of the surface area really easily. And plates are also fun to work with because I think gravity really helps the slip get into the impressions on a plate more than it does, when I fill this in with slip, I'm still gonna, try to hold the pot where I put the slip. I'm gonna try to hold it so that the gravity does sort of take care of it, but I'm not that careful with it. So I think it's you're more likely to end up with air pockets on a pot where where it's a round surface and you're trying to make sure that you're forcing the slip into it rather than a plate where the slip is just sort of falling into the holes. There's a great potter on Instagram. I think she's Chinese, and I think her name might be Unhahill, and she's a teacher, but she has a slip inlay video where she goes over how to put the slip in, and she says you're doing it wrong if you're doing anything but sort of pushing the slip into these incisions with your brush. So it is important to really get it in there. I guess so this is sort of a general can start taking off as whatever sort of design you want it to be. Sometimes I'll just outline an animal shape. I've done and understand this is not improvisation here. This is a bird that I've put on about 10 pots, so I kind of remember how to do it from memory. And you can and one of the things that's great about this is you're going to be scraping off, so you're going to be scraping off some of the surface of the pot. So if you're drawing on the pot with your whatever you're using for a guide here, it's very you're not worried about these lines coming through. Sometimes with the compass, if you're incising really deep with the compass, sometimes it takes a little bit more to get those lines to come out. But with this bird, I don't know how easy it is to see that there's a bird on there. Maybe not that easy. Yeah, there he is. There's a little bird. So then I like to do birds with a small triangle. I also really like combining the big triangles and the small triangles, like on that pot, on that plate that's over there. But just as you're making tools, just think about any kind of shape you might want to have. Those Korean buncheong plates and what Michael Klein does often have a lot of flowers in them, and so that's why I have this kind of petal-shaped tool that I use for flower petals. There's also, of course, stamps like these that you can buy from Armadillo, and I think these probably work just as well as the chopsticks. I bought this the other day. I was like, I'm going to try that. I don't really like the idea of using stamps that somebody else made, but that's just kind of me, and I probably shouldn't have that kind of prejudice, but I just do. So.
Can you go back for a second about
Yes.
the compass? I don't understand what you mean by that.
Oh yeah, I really wish I had brought my compass, but so for a pot like that purple one, the circles are first described by just a compass. So I'll take a compass and I'll make some circles on the pot that I'm then going to use for just guidelines.
I don't know what a compass is.
Oh, sorry.
Like not a north-south compass, but like a mathematical.
It makes circles.
drawing compass.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. A compass is it's got one stick that has a needle on the end of it, and then another stick that points off of that has another needle on the end of it. So you poke the compass into the pot, and then the other.
Like a protractor. No?
Am I using the wrong term?
No, you're
People confuse them, but yeah.
Okay.
It's like north, south, east, west.
You could also do it by cutting out a circle, or getting a circle punched in something, and then just laying the circle on the pot and inscribing the line around the circle. Just any way that you can get a circle onto the surface of the pot will work. Yeah, sorry. So usually what I'll do when I'm making something kind of representational is I'll start the outline first, and this clay is a great consistency. It might not surprise you to hear that this can start to hurt your hand after a while, making all of these impressions. So it's good to use the softest clay possible just to avoid that happening. But it's also good to take breaks as you're doing this so that you don't end up with carpal tunnel, which so far I haven't, but who knows. So let's do the feet too. And it's funny, I didn't really realize how useful these triangles are, but you can really make pretty much any design with these triangles, and I think they're great because they end up sort of interlocking in a great way that allows you to create negative and positive space and really use it. That doesn't really look like a foot, but that's okay. It's close enough. Then, great thing about chopsticks, they have the round end. So when you need to do your eyes, round end of chopsticks, great for bird eyes. And then you can put some triangles around the eye to kind of highlight it. That's that first kind of little bit of interlocking there where the teeth of the triangles kind of go into each other, and then just do as much of that as you want. Sometimes you can get lost in this sort of design and not realize that you have done things unevenly, or if you're doing a circle, you may not realize that you've put 3 layers of lines around on one part of the circle and 2 layers of lines around on another part of the circle. But that's okay.
Creates dimension, doesn't it?
It does create dimension. You can fix it or not. And this part of it I love. Not only can I sit and ostensibly talk to family members, but I spend a lot of time on the phone for work. And I don't know if any of you are lawyers, I spend a lot of time on Zoom as well. And I've gotten really good at, I do employment law, and when the defense wants to take my client's deposition, they're going to spend the first 3 hours of the deposition just burning the clock out so that they can bill a lot of time to the file and make lots of money for their law firm. And there is no way I'm going to sit through that and do nothing. I used to, go, obviously I'm always listening to my client's testimony because that's important, but I've figured out how to, I don't say much because all I'm allowed to say during a deposition like that is objection form. And so if the other side asks a stupid question that is, that I don't like, I'll just say objection form. But I've gotten really good at sort of being able to hold this at a level where you might just see the top of the chopstick on the Zoom camera every once in a while. And sometimes, when I'm talking on the phone with a client, if they have a lot to say that I don't necessarily need to write down, I know Zoom now has an AI companion where it will write down everything that everybody says, but I'm not willing to use that. But, this is a great thing to do if you just have time where your hands want to be active, but your brain can be, doing something else. So I can talk through this whole thing while having filled in this bird. That's kind of a bird. And maybe that's a snake bite. But just so that you can see what the kind of inlay process looks like. So I brought some of my half and half consistency white slip with me. This shape of brush seems to be what the few process videos I've seen of people doing slip inlay, including that really great teacher on Instagram that I mentioned a minute ago. Michael Klein uses one of these too. I just bought some of them at Armadillo. They're like $3 or whatever. So you just dip your brush in the slip and you start to fill it in, and make sure it's on the camera. Yeah. And you can see already the tendency for these air bubbles to form. Yeah, you can see there's a big round one right there. So you want to just make sure that those are not there when you finish this initial coat of slip. So we're going around.
How long did it take you to figure out what consistency you needed to start with?
A pretty long time. I had a lot of inlay pots that I was having to make lots of corrections on because I wasn't using a thin enough slip initially. But you can probably see there's like an air bubble in pretty much every one of these holes, and so, but not quite so many on these over here. So really it's just a matter of, like that teacher says, just pushing the brush into the indentations. A lot of the slip inlay stuff that I've seen, the impressions are not as deep as the ones that I tend to make with the chopstick. And so I'm always sort of trying to find the balance between, I don't want to have the impressions be too deep, because the deeper they are, of course, the more layers of slip the pot requires. But if you make them too shallow, again, you're going to scrape off your impressions when you're scraping off your slip. So after it's like that, where you can still see, I think you can probably see, there's still some little air bubbles in there. So what I'll do once I think I've pushed as much in with the brush as I can, is I'll take this. This is great for ensuring that you will not be able to wear this shirt out in public. After you're done with this, I'm gonna try not to get it on the camera, but just take your finger and push it all down, and then you'll see where each of the little air bubbles was and is no longer, because you really just pushed all that slip into the impression. And so that's a pretty decent first coat of slip where I'm pretty confident that there's not too many bubbles in there. Now, funny enough, when and I'll just go ahead and fill the bird in too. When this gets to be dry enough to put another coat of slip on, and I'll talk about that, how dry that is in a minute. But when it gets to be dry enough, you will see some air bubbles having opened up. So that's a really important thing to try to address on each subsequent coat of slip, is making sure that any air bubble that you see, you try to close it up so that you don't have to do repair work later on. The slip is gonna, flow all over the pot, and oh well, because you're just gonna scrape it all off anyway. So if you want to start combining colors, which I'll talk about in a minute, there's some different ways of doing that too. Now the bird's most of the way filled in, and it needs its little padding.
Have you thought about the slip trailing squeezy thingies that you could?
I've seen somebody use those. The idea, I don't know why this is, because I'm perfectly content to sit for hours with my punching tool, but the idea of squirting a little bead of slip into each indentation, to me, just is beyond the pale. I'm not going to do that. You could do that. And that's, I think,
curious if it
no,
would work or not.
I think it probably would. I've also, I have tried, and that's probably a really good idea for like the corrections that I have to make after I've scraped it and there may be some air pockets. It may be a really good idea for just the first layer of slip that's going to go on there. I haven't really experimented with those, and I haven't. Is that something where, do you think like a half and half consistency slip, just reclaimed slip, that would work in one of those slip trailers?
I mean, I would think just like a little, almost like a little mini ketchup bottle kind of situation.
It will
different tips.
It will
Yeah.
dump out really fast.
You know, reckless
Oh.
process.
No, I want that.
I'm
If
just
you
curious, I mean,
use-
just thinking, because if you squirt it in kind of hard enough, you could prevent bubbles.
Yeah,
Because
I
the
mean-
brush, I think, creates bubbles.
and that's what this process of
Yeah.
tapping it in is designed to eliminate. But
Yeah,
that
that's
that
meditation of its life. Something going on besides. I'm too impatient.
Yeah, it is easy to get impatient.
So if you use thinned out slip with Darvan, it will be a lot denser, and you'll have to do a lot less coats, and it actually will dry a lot faster because there's no actual water. There's not water added to that slip.
But you still is the Darvan what makes it viscous at all, or do you still use you're still using slip that has water in it?
Yeah, the slip has water in it, but you can use like pudding thickness consistency and add a couple drops of Darvan, and it'll make it like watery. But it's because the particles are pushing away from each other. I'm probably not explaining
And there's
that
more clay, there's
correctly.
more clay.
And
clay.
so
So it won't shrink as much.
when you fill your
Got it.
holes with that, it will actually fill in better and
Oh.
thicker in one layer.
Okay. Two Darvan recommendations.
Yes, definitely try it.
I need to. I've been avoiding that pint that I have because I'm a little scared of it because I don't know really how to use it. But,
You could
yeah.
try to buy sleep as well. That is for sleep casting. That is already have the dark ones. So you don't need to experiment.
I love all my reclaim slip just because it's so easy to make, but that seems like
But don't do that because you need to use the same slip that is your clay.
Oh.
Yeah, then you have
Yeah.
your body.
that makes sense. Yeah. So that's one way of doing an inlaid design. Another way, and I'm just going to carve a little bit on this. I really like doing botanical kind of things, and so sometimes it's fun when you don't necessarily want to spend quite so much time and energy on one pot. Just get your loop tool, and these are diamond core ones, which I got for a present. Not sure they're really worth the money. I know diamond core, everybody seems to love them, but these little loop tools from Armadillo are also great. And so sometimes I'll just go in, start carving kind of plant looking things on the pot. We'll do a taste test. Yeah, this one is a little sharper. You can kind of go as deep as you want to with these, but again, the depth is really gonna determine how much slip you need to put on there. But I think one of the things that I really love about this is inlay is, in a way, it's sort of forgiving of your crappy design ideas sometimes. And so if you want to just, if you're just sitting there and you're like, I think I'm going to just carve some plant-looking stuff onto a pot, it can end up looking pretty good even if you're not, directly copying someone's botanical drawing. there's a kind of beach grass motif that I've done a few times where all the grasses are kind of pointing in the same direction because ostensibly the wind is blowing them. But this one, what I'm going to do here, and I was going to talk about this more in a minute, is one thing that's been really, really fun is making a lot of different colored slips. And I'll do those where I just take some porcelain reclaim, water it down to, half and half consistency, measure it out approximately, throw some mason stain in it, and then you've got colors. And I'll show you some pictures of those in a bit. But this is, this took me all of, a minute while I was talking about this. But what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to fill them in with a Bermuda green mason stain. I think is a really pretty color. And so I'm going to fill these in with that. I may, a fun thing that I've figured out is if you do your first coat of slip, a contrasting color from the remaining coats, you get this really great outline. And it's a very sort of sharp and defined thing. I'll show you in a minute. So that's cool. I'll probably do a brown slip as the first coat on here, and then the rest of them I'll fill in with the Bermuda green. One thing about these kind of thicker lines too is you don't have to worry so much about air bubbles, because if they're not, a little defined pocket, but more they're just a long thing, they're less likely to form air bubbles. And then what I'll do, this is really a later step, but I might make some flowers in here too. As I said, there's, all those commercially available flower stamps are probably a great idea. What I would probably really do with this pot, if I wasn't just demoing with it, is I would do all of the Bermuda green slip. So I had all the grass green with a brown outline, and then I would go back. I would hope the pot was wet enough that I could still make the impressions on it pretty easily, so it didn't dry too much. And then I would go back, make some impressions that were these flower designs, and then fill them in with a more flowery, contrasting color like a pink or a red, purple, something like that. But you can do whatever you want. Eventually, we'll be in something.
Do you make use of a damp box?
No, I should. If I had one, I would. But I just have a lot of dry cleaning plastic and a lot of space. So that's basically my damp box. Oh, good.
When you're punching your impressions in, does it go through on the other side? Do you have to like trim the inside to get rid of to get skin again?
So that's one of the reasons I love doing bottles, because you can't see the inside. But yeah, totally. With this, anytime I do cups or bowls, you can see they kind of look diseased. and so ideally, sometimes what I'll do is just when I'll put it on the wheel and basically trim the inside of it. Sometimes I'll put a couple of coats of slip instead of doing that, and that sort of eliminates the diseased appearance of the inside. But yeah, for sure.
Never any inlay on the inside for design purposes?
I have not ever done that, but especially with, I guess platters and plates, you would consider that the inside that you were inscribing into, but no, I haven't done it on bowls. That might look cool though.
You just carve E at the bottom of the bowl.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. So this is one where, there we go. I put this probably has 5 or 6 coats of just white slip. And so I just take my loop tool, and this is a little bit wetter than I wish it was. And when it's wet, what you end up seeing is the holes that you punched. Here you can see the line from the compass. I don't know if you can really see that. You can see where the line from the compass is still a little bit visible in there. But it's not a very deep line, so as you're scraping off the slip,
When you're not doing a demo, do you do this on the wheel?
sometimes.
Or do you do it by hand?
Sometimes I do it on the wheel. Sometimes I just do it on just any flat surface.
Do you have to sharpen your tools often?
I don't know how to do that, so so I use this. This will probably last maybe 5 or 6 or 7 pots, and then it gets too dull. But if how do you sharpen tools like this?
I think I got it at Home Depot. It's made by Fiskars. It's a little handheld flat file, but it's an extremely fine diamond grit on, and I use that to sharpen my tools, and I'm not like super fussy about my angle, and it's usually about 10 swipes, and it returns the edge really quickly.
That is so great to know.
I don't think I'll get the Fiskars diamond sharpener.
All right.
No, I think that's where I got it.
Hey,
I don't even scrape very much. I sharpen my tools like once every 2 weeks.
I probably should do that.
You said earlier, this doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
I thought, oh no, are you just throwing them away?
I have like 10 of these sitting in my tool drawer, thinking, well, I'm going to use it for something, so I can't throw it away. And anyway, it's ridiculous to throw away tools that you can still use. But it had not occurred to me. It probably should have.
Maybe that's what I can do for my demo someday.
Yeah,
Tool sharpening.
tool sharpening. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, keep your tools alive.
Great chance.
And as you're scraping, you'll kind of see you'll get to a point where mostly you can see the triangles, but then you'll get to another point where their lines are sort of not that well defined as triangles, where they're still sort of soft. And if you scrape just a little bit more, you'll get that really sharply defined kind of teeth look. And this honestly is my favorite part of this whole process, because it's like reveal time. Oh, did my design look really stupid, or did I like how it came out? Somehow you can't. I don't seem to really be able to tell that when I'm just doing the punching. Oh, am I? Oh, great.
Your hand blocks the way.
Oh, sorry.
Here you go. Got it.
Does that leave an indentation at all in the vessel play?
Yeah, so what I try to do is I try to keep my scraping as even as possible, but it doesn't necessarily leave an indentation, and because ultimately I probably, as you can see I'm doing right now, end up scraping pretty much every part of the pot, but a lot of times it will leave an uneven surface. So I always try to go in with my scraping tool after I've finished scraping, so that you can see the full design, and just feeling on the surface of the pot where there's uneven spots, and I'll just go in with the scraper and hope that if I scrape right there, I'm not gonna scrape out too much of the slip that's in the impressions that are still there. Like once you're down to this level, where you can see the triangles and they're pretty sharply defined, if you scrape more, you do run the risk of losing, getting down to the bottom of the impression and then not having a good hard triangle shape anymore.
So convex has better results, would you say?
Yeah, it's certainly easier to, I'm not so worried about having a really smooth surface on a convex, bottle form as I am wanting to make sure that if I make a platter, it's got a nice flat base, or nice flat, interior.
Have you ever dipped a piece in slip to try and fill the holes?
I don't think that would work because I think you would still need to somehow use something to push the slip into the holes. I think if you dipped it in, you would end up with slip that was kind of coating the surface of the pot without actually getting into the indentations. So you really need to be able to push it in there. Oh, what would work?
A massage gun against the side of like the board, you just kind of get it vibrating.
Oh, vibrate it in there.
You can use one of those dental vibrators.
Dude, I am so lazy.
I love that.
I'm all about the cheats and finding shortcuts.
I don't think that's a shortcut. I think that's just a good process.
Yeah.
You could just sit on the table.
Well, that's what I was thinking at first. It's like you get it on the table and you hit the table with the massage gun.
So I have this dental vibration machine that I use for icing because I decorate cookies and it takes the bubbles
what I was
out of
thinking
my
of.
icing.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
I
so
love that.
they yeah.
Baker's got a bake.
I think it's called a stone vibrator.
Okay,
That's how
yeah.
you work for dentists.
Yeah,
Of what?
I don't
What's the
remember
name
what
of
it.
It's called a stone vibrator. You use it to we would use it for, I can't remember the term, but when people take impressions, you can't have bubbles in people's teeth. So you have to put the impression on this thing that vibrates very strong, and then what is essentially slip into it.
Okay.
Amalgam?
What?
Is that amalgam stuff?
Amalgam is what is what do the
I bought like a
impression.
$50 one on Amazon. It works great for my icing, so I think it would be good
Yes.
for this too.
That is such a great. Look at that.
It's like a dental vibrator.
Wrecking a Zen situation.
Hey, it's all about learning.
These are billable hours. Just made a $6,000 pot about $40.
And you may be able to see right here. Yeah, right here the triangles are kind of smushing into each other. That's partly because I'm scraping it when it's a little wetter than I should be scraping it, but also just because I need to get down to the edges of the triangle. Wow, this one somehow doesn't seem to have any air bubbles, which is probably partly because it's flat, but also partly because I'm scraping it at a good stage of wetness where nothing's really popping out. So this is sort of how I would do it. And then of course I would clean this up, clean up all the little bits of slip that are still on there. And then it's still stuck to the bat at this point, so I'll get it off the bat and then I'll trim the bottom. Don't ever try to do inlay on a plate that you've already trimmed the bottom of, because you've lost that thickness that's so important for making sure the impressions don't go all the way through the pot. Oh yeah, that one I'm not going to scrape because it got too dry. And I'm going to have to do it at home where I won't embarrass myself. Okay, I just have a few other little process things to talk about. Is it okay if I?
you ever added iridescence at all?
No. What is that something that you can add to just a porcelain slip?
I don't know.
Is that like the?
Who did I see recently doing glow in the dark stuff? Oh, Eric Kiersbeck.
You can make it look like opal, that's the inlay.
Oh,
maybe.
cool.
Oh, like a luster.
Freestyle over here.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was about to get to with. Because adding iridescence, what I was about to talk about was just adding color to all of this stuff. There we go. So, in order to not look like I'm totally ripping off this potter who I understood this technique from, I decided, well, I'm going to start putting some little people and creatures and birds and things. So, that pot right there has a couple of little guys waving at each other. One place, if you're not great with figuring out characters to do, there's a cartoonist named Linda Barry. And she has a couple of books about making comics, and one of her great things that she teaches you about is how to draw monsters. And basically, you can just do it however you want. She says, start with a squiggly line. You take 2 minutes and fill in the squiggly line however you want. Do whatever eyes you want, and it's just a great little tool for figuring out how can I make some things that look like interesting characters that, like those guys can talk to each other or do whatever. So I started doing that. On this one, he's holding a flower, and you can't quite see it very well in this picture. But so this is a combination of the triangles, the petal tool, and then the eyes and the teeth are just, I think they're either a ballpoint pen or a pin tool. I mean, you can use whatever you want to make your impressions. I like using the compass to do sort of double wedding ring quilt sort of designs. Those are really fun, and they're. I think what I did for that was I printed a circle that I then put on the surface of the platter, and then used a pin tool to poke a hole at. It was a circle with maybe divided into 16ths, and just poked a hole into each of the lines that may cause the 16ths to happen, and so then you can put your compass at any point along there, and you start getting these great patterns. No, so far none of them I've done has been the same as another, but and then you can just sort of improvise how you fill it in with the triangles. When I realized about mason staining clay, I also realized about making your own slips out of your just white porcelain reclaim. Just throw some mason stain in there, and you've got colors. These buckets, which are El Milagro masa, if you make tamales at Christmas time, I probably have like 15 of these buckets, and each one has a different color of slip. And sometimes I'll run out of white reclaim, and then I'll be like, oh, it's time to make some white pots that I'm going to inlay. So I'll do something like that and just inlay them with colors. That's kind of the grass design that I was working on that this pot, where I did I think on this one actually, the flowers are far enough away from the grasses, and you can see how the pink sort of bleeds in. I think I probably put the pink and the green in at the same time. But other times what I'll do is, on this one, I did the inlay. First I did the flowers with the circles around them, and I inlaid those in green. And the circles, talking about cake decorating, the circles are icing tips, and they make really great. One thing that's cool about inlay is when you use that pretty flowing slip, the half and half consistency, it'll go into pretty much any crevice. So even something that's as thin as the edge of an icing tip will work for that. And then so I did the icing tip circle around the petals, and then I filled that in with green, multiple coats of green slip, and then I scraped that off, and then I went with the triangle tool and just inlaid a set of triangles around each flower, and then I filled those in with mango slip, and then I scraped that off. So as long as you're keeping your pot wet enough, you're not going to have a problem with doing more impressions. But if it gets too dry, and if it gets too dry, you can re-wet. I have a spray. I use this kind of sprayer, although this one you have to push it down to each spray. The best thing in the world is at the nail supply store, they have this sprayer that you just pull it and it has a constant stream. That's way better on your hands. But just use a sprayer to wet things that get too dry if that happens. And then you can go to sort of extremes. I think Robin recognizes this pot. It ended up as, at first I did the white triangles, and then I scraped off the white, did a layer of lavender, scraped that off, and did a set of triangles with blue, and then I ended up, this is 7, 8 different colors of slip. So it took a really, really long time to do, but all you're doing is just having fun with this stuff.
Now, are you layering them on top of each other?
No, so I would do the white and then scrape it all off, and then
press
and then the next round would be the lavender ones, and then I would scrape off all the lavender slip, and then I would do another set of blue, scrape off all the blue slip, then do a green. So it does take a while, but if you're just out there having fun.
Is there any reason you couldn't do all the slip colors and then scrape them all off?
Yes, they will all run together. The slip, especially using that kind of half and half consistency slip, like with this, it's gonna run all over your pot. So if you're trying to do a rainbow, for instance, I guess if you were the sort of person who would use a slip trailer and use a thicker slip to try to fill in each thing, that might work. Just like on this one,
It would just get muddy with the other colors.
yeah, they would.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but on that one, the one with the flowers, I mean, you can see where some of the grass kind of got pink stained in it, and some of the flower petals got green. Sometimes that's a really pretty effect. But if you're trying to do something precise like a rainbow, I think you probably have to do it one slip color at a time. This was fun. This is a kind of a close-up of a pot where I marbled some black clay and some blue clay together through the bowl, and then did the inlay just white. But since the background is already this sort of agate surface, I think it makes kind of a fun sort of psychedelic looking design.
Wait, how did you achieve the background?
The background is marbled, two colors of clay that I wedged together and then threw with. So it's nerikomi, which just, and you can use as many colors as you want in the background. This one was really fun. There's that bowl that's down there is kind of this same technique. What I did here was did some of those flowers with the icing top, and then I layered probably, and this kind of gets to your question of can you do some different colors all at the same time. I probably layered 6 different colors of slip on this pot, So each time I would put a new coat on, it would be a different color. And then what's really, really fun about this process is you can kind of, as you're scraping, each scrape reveals a different set of colors. And so you've got these great opportunities
How do you know
for,
where to stop?
you don't. you just have to kind of hope. And I love these the way the flowers, if you don't scrape all the way down so that you can see the very edges of the impression, it's almost, you sort of have the idea of the impression without going into the very edges of it, which I think can look really cool. This is what I was talking about earlier about the really sharply defined lines that you can get from putting one color of slip into your inlay first. So this was a pot that I think it's some green clay, Bermuda green stained clay, and then I did, this is that kind of beach grass design I was talking about. Other people do it better than this. But the first coat of slip that I put on it was a brown slip, and I let that get leather hard. My next coats of slip were all white. So when I scraped it, I just got to the brown outlines. You can see some of them, the brown is almost the entire blade of grass, and that's where I had to scrape far enough down so that I scraped off almost all of the white and just got to the brown that was at the very bottom of the impression. But that's a technique that I really love to use, and that's actually on that bottle. I think has, I think it does. Yep, the first coat on this bottle is a turquoise slip, and then the rest of the coats are the either black or brown. So some of them have a turquoise outline. It's hard to be real precise with it. Once I tried a pot where I did the first coat, it was a white porcelain bowl. The first coat of slip I did was a black, really watered down, because I was hoping to get just the outline, and then I inlaid it with white slip. So I was hoping to have just the black triangles, but only the outlines of the triangles. Somehow it didn't come out quite as even as I would have liked for it to, but that was an interesting little experiment. This one is just, it has no triangles or anything. It was just one that I did where I carved the little guy with a pin tool or a ballpoint pen, and then took another just round thing and just jabbed it into the pot to make some stars, and then I inlaid, and then I filled it in with white. It's a black body, clay body, and then the white slip. But I didn't scrape off the white slip completely, so it made those sort of cloud-looking things around it. And I think this is the last thing I was going to show you. This is a different way of thinking about inlay, where I made some bowls, and I think I'll talk about the black colored bowl. It's a black bowl that has some pink clay and maybe some yellow clay layered into it, so when I threw the pot, it was already a couple of different colors. But then what I did was I cut kind of a trench, and I inlaid it with marbled blue and white porcelain. And what was kind of fun about that, I always find, I make a lot of nerikomi pottery because it's just a fun thing where you don't have to worry about surface decoration. It just and for those of you who don't know what that is, you take some, I usually do, like, I'll do a layer of white, a layer of, say, blue, a layer of yellow, a layer of green, and then I'll just, and those are the colors of the clay bodies, and then I'll just wedge them up together. But when you throw, and I don't handle it at all because I'm terrible at it, but when you throw with marbled clay, it sort of loses its it's always the same sort of swirly looking pattern. And so I thought, well, I really love seeing people's nerikomi pots that are slab built because you have a lot more control over how the clay is marbled in those slabs. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna make a slab that's just blue and white clay, and I'm gonna inlay that into this pot. And so I carved this trench into it, and then I sort of made a snake out of blue and white marbled clay, and I pressed it down, and then I pressed it really hard into that trench, and then I scraped the sides so that they were even. So that vase right there has a band of blue and white kind of marbled clay that's inlaid into it in the same way. So that's a kind of inlay that doesn't take any slip. It doesn't take this kind of impression making tool. It's just inlaying one color of clay into another. And this is another, oh, that was my lunch. That's another one that I did that way, where I had a piece of pink clay right before I started throwing it. I put some yellow and blue kind of worms onto the clay and sort of slapped them on there so that when I threw the bowl, it was a pink clay with orange and blue stripes. And then I made a little snake out of black and blue mixed up clay, and I inlaid that into that horizontal band that is, I made a little trench around the pot, and then I inlaid that into that.
When you're inlaying you carve the trench, is that when it's like leather hard, the same as?
Yeah, and again, I try to do it as wet as possible, and I score and slip.
I was gonna ask you.
So I've had, that's a hard technique because there will be little, it does tend to, since it's already just regular clay, it's not slip, it's really hard to get it all the way into the trench and get the trench all the way filled in up into its little corners. But if you just squish a lot, I think that works pretty well.
So you're just squishing a snake in there, not like a veneer. You didn't like
Right.
flatten it out and cut it to size.
No, just, and there will be, when you kind of squish the snake in there, the hope is that it'll overflow the sides of the trench just a little bit, and then you can use your scraping tool to scrape that off. I think that's everything I had to say, so happy to answer.
So sorry if you already said this.
Please do not
I missed
apologize.
it. Why choose porcelain for this? Is that just your personal preference, or?
I think it's what works best with mason stains. I did do some, I think one of the pots I showed was Cinco Rojo, the nice red clay that they have at Armadillo, and I inlaid some white into that. I've done that with some pots, and that can be really pretty, just that. And that's kind of what those Michael Klein pots that I showed you at the beginning, this I think is what you would get if you tried, Cinco Rojo with white slip inlaid into it.
Can I add to that? Porcelain is also not very groggy, so you don't, so when you're scraping it's a lot.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and with the slip, I mean the white, using the white as the background for anything you put mason stain on too is the best for color. Anybody else?
When you do your multicolored pieces and you have all that extra clippings, do you work it back into your black?
Sometimes, although I think I have the idea that if you put too much mason stain into clay, it doesn't do well. So what I usually do is I'll have a bucket of multicolored reclaim, and it's kind of like if you've ever been to Austin Resource Recovery, you can buy buckets of paint that are like when people turn in their paint that they don't use for their house, Austin Resource Recovery mixes them all into this really, it's never the same, but it's this really nice sort of brownish, grayish color, and I'll just use that as the clay body. So when I make a black clay, I start with a clay that has no mason stain in it. So the multicolored reclaim all just turns into grayish brownish. Good question.
I also don't know what Mason stain is.
Mason, I didn't either, but Mason stain is just this powder. You buy it from Armadillo. It comes, or you can buy it from anywhere, any clay supply, but it comes in 1/4 pound bags and 1 pound bags, and there are like every color of Mason stain you can buy, and it's just this powder, and you mix it into either you can mix it into slip, you can mix it into sort of reclaimed clay and make so it's a way of staining a clay body or staining a slip. There are some Mason stain colors will burn out, so you have to be careful depending on what temperature you're firing to. You have to be careful what Mason stains you're using, but there's this chart on the wall at Armadillo that tells you what Mason stains don't burn out of cone 5 firing.
Tenant or no?
Huh?
I haven't seen the chart because I burned out. I tried to make a pink porcelain.
Oh,
that's
pink's
a
a problem.
Yeah, wait. Mhm. At first, at first I really cared about the chart, and then I was like, if something burns out, it burns out. And I haven't really had anything burn out, but I believe that could.
What about you using triangular headed nails as a tool? Have you ever tried that?
I have not. My sense is that bamboo is better for making the impressions because it's a little bit porous.
And it won't cave in on the nail head.
Yeah, but I'm not sure about that. And yeah, you want. I mean, these are flat on the bottom where the impressions go in, because I think. But actually, a triangular headed nail might be something that would be really good, because I feel like the slip might flow into that better than it would a flat bottomed hole. So
That'd be awkward to hold while you
it would, yeah.
You create a pattern, you nail it into a piece of wood, and you create your own little slip.
You could do that.
You have your own little pre-circled.
I've thought about asking a machine shop to make me a circle made out of triangles, but then I thought that's too much cheating.
That's kind of a funny thing to ask.
Yeah.
A circle out of triangles.
Yeah, that's flexible enough that I can put it over the surface of a pot and sort of work it in there.
Have you ever thought of leather working tools? They have a lot of like
Yeah.
shaped letters.
No.
Yeah.
That's,
Oh, yeah, there's a Tandy leather shop down in South
Yeah.
Meadows.
that's a great idea.
If filament wouldn't stick to it, then you could 3D print whatever design you want. Like with a stamp and then on those.
Filament?
Plastic.
Like 3D printers, like plastic.
Oh, I probably could 3D print all kind of tools for this. I had not
And
thought
then
of
you don't like the line for the 3D printing, just sand it down ever so slightly, and then it just is.
Oh,
Or a vapor vase. Or
Yeah.
so just like whittling something out of bamboo. Yeah.
Have you tried any other kind of pigments or just Mason stains? Like have you used like US pigments or any of the other brands?
I didn't know there were others, so no.
Very inspiring.
So cool.
All right.